What is needed is the bliss out of Transcendental Meditation.
TMers came to my high school and they gave their basic lecture. They talked about IQ increasing, grade point average increasing.
Patrick Ryan, thanks so much indeed for coming on to talk Lease from your home in Philadelphia. Now, you got in touch because back in the 70s and 80s, where you were involved in the Transcendental Meditation movement, or TM. Now you speak out about it and warn others about TM, and this includes helping people to leave the group through interventions. But before we hear your story, can you talk about the Transcendental Meditation movement's beginning in the US? It all began with the influx of Eastern philosophies during the early 1960s, isn't that right?
Yeah, well, actually, the first Indian yoga teacher that came to the United States came in 1893 with Swami Vivekananda at the World Parliament of Religions. And then he was followed in the 1920s by Paramahansa Yogananda, the founder of the Self-Realization Fellowship. His book, published in 1946, Autobiography of a Yogi, is probably the book that he's most known for. And then in 1959, in the spring, Maharishi came from India and landed in Honolulu, Hawaii. And then something happened in the United States in 1965. President Johnson signed an act. Sometimes it's referred to as the Asian Exclusion Act or the Immigration and Nationality Act, which allowed people of East Asian background to come to the United States. And from that, we began sort of a flood of Eastern teachers. In 1971, Maharishi founded a university, Maharishi International University, that I attended. So the first campus of the Maharishi International University was in California, and it was founded in 1973. And then in 1974, the TM movement purchased a university that had gone bankrupt in Fairfield, Iowa. It was called Parsons College, and they bought the campus, and the Maharishi International University moved from California to Iowa. And that's where I began.
Well, it was when you were 17 that you first got involved with the TM movement while you were a writer for your school newspaper. So how did you get drawn in, and what were those initial months like?
Yeah, so it was 1975, somewhere mid-February or beginning of February of 1975, Maharishi appeared on the Merv Griffin show. And at that point, about 40,000 people were learning TM a month in the United States. It was called the Merv Griffin Wave internally. And a few things significantly happened in my life. One was my next door neighbor had come home from college and he had learned TM and he was telling me about it. At that time, the Philadelphia Phillies, who are the baseball team in Philly, spring train in Florida, in Clearwater, which is right next to where I grew up in St. Pete. And the initiator, the person who taught me TM, was teaching some of the Phillies. So the Phillies had learned Pete Rose, Larry Boa, many of these athletes. And the editor of my paper suggested that I go, and I suggested it. They approved it to go write a story about this. And so I went to write a story for this newspaper. And I walked in, and I was sort of a little bit overwhelmed at the sort of bustling nature of the center. There were surgeons coming through learning TM. There were doctors. There were attorneys, people of position in society. And in addition to that, there were athletes. And so I signed up and paid my $55 to learn as a high school student. Mm-hmm. And so I learned on March 2nd, 1975, and that sort of changed my life. It was kind of an interesting thing happened. I was to go hunting that weekend with my father, so I learned TM on a Saturday. And as soon as I learned, I went up to Ocala National Forest hunting, and I'm telling all these hunters about meditation. kind of strange when I think about it. And then I went back Sunday evening for the first of the 3 follow-up classes. And about maybe 2 weeks after that, Maharishi was on a world tour inaugurating what he referred to as the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment. The dawn of the Age of Enlightenment was his, or the TM movement's discovery, so to speak, that when 1% of the population practiced TM, the crime rate went down. And so it was sort of fascinating to me. At that lecture, it was in Atlanta. I think Brian Josephson was there, if I'm not mistaken. He was a physicist who won the Nobel Prize in 1964 for tunneling in physics. And there was just people, scientists, all talking about this Maharishi effect of TM lowering accident rates, crime rates, things like that. And so that I came back from that, sort of fired up. Soon after the teachers, so I'm 17, and most of the teachers were in their 20s, maybe early 30s. And I remember the chairman of the center, he had a Corvette, and he said, "Pat, you want to drive it?" I'm like, "Yes." Look like a young man, and we're driving the car around and having a good time. And he encouraged me to go on it's called a residence course. It's within the organization. And that was in Melbourne, Florida, and it was a week-long course, and they actually paid for me to go. And the person who was directing the course was Mia Farrow, the actress, sister, Prudence Farrow, or Prudence Bruns was her name. At that time, she's the woman that the Beatles wrote the song, "Dear Prudence, Won't You Come Out and Play?" And so I spent a good amount of time with her. I guess maybe I was a little bit starstruck. And she encouraged me to go to the TM University when I graduated from high school, which was just a couple months away. And that started me on a path. So it took a lot of convincing of my parents, or I don't know if convincing is the right word. It was an ultimatum on my part. To send me to this university that at that time had just gained the candidacy status for accreditation. It was not yet fully accredited. By the time I graduated, it was fully accredited. So I drove, I remember, in September, loading up my Volkswagen from Florida and driving the 26, 7, 8 hours to Iowa and pulling into the campus early in the morning, just excited, not really knowing that much about what the TM movement's teachings were. It was a couple days before I arrived that the local teachers had told me that, you have to wear a suit and tie to go to the dining room, and you need to wear a suit and tie to go to classes. And I'm like, I live in Florida. I don't really have suits and ties. I have shorts and flip-flops. But that was the first time I was sort of introduced to the idea that you had to dress a specific way. And when I went into university, I was not a vegetarian, and no one had mentioned that people were vegetarians. No one had mentioned things like karma or dharma or any of those kinds of religious concepts. So I went to, the dining hall and sat down and went through the line, and there was a meat eater section where there were cold cuts, and I sat down at a table and I started eating, and the people across from me got up and moved away because I was eating meat. So there was all of this subtle teaching of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. So that's how I sort of got pulled into the university.
Well, after a year or so, the Maharishi announced that advanced programs would be available and that students would be able to do amazing things, supernatural things, including levitating and becoming invisible, apparently. So can you go into some detail about that time and what you experienced and what was revealed to you about the group?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in 1975, in the summertime, a number of the teachers were leaving the local center and going off to Switzerland on an advanced course that was top secret. No one was talking about it. We just knew that it was something hush hush. So that was where he first began his experiments in these areas. So So I went to the university in 75. This university was set up that you go to school. At that time, it was set up for 3 months of academics and then a month of what was called Forest Academy. And that was a time where it was not in the forest, but the idea was that you were stepping back from academics, communication with the outside world. You weren't supposed to write home, write letters, call home, read newspapers, any of those types of things. You spent a month focused on the Maharishi's teachings. And that was from morning till 9:30 at night. It was the whole day, 7 days a week. And
Wow.
increase the amount of meditation from the normal, in my case, 17 minutes twice a day. The amount got doubled and a little bit more. And then we were introduced to some yoga exercises and also breathing exercises. And so we studied for 1 month Maharishi's teaching and this happened, these month things happened. I went through 10 of them, and then two more 3-month versions of it in a 5-year period that I was at the university. So during that time, you were assigned a buddy. The buddy was to be with you at all times. If you had to get up and go to the bathroom, the buddy went with you. If you walked to your dorm, the buddy went with you. You're always to be with someone. And so in the first course, or rounding courses it was called, or Forest Academy, the idea was introduced that a man can become perfect and every action that he does can be spontaneously correct, that one doesn't have to think about what one needs to make intellectual decisions. If you're going to go choose toothpaste, you will automatically choose the right toothpaste. If you're going to pick a car, you would automatically pick the right car. Whatever you do when you're enlightened is correct. And so for a month, that theme was repeated in many, many different ways. And at the end of it, the conclusion was Maharishi was enlightened, and thus everything he said or did was correct. And that's when the switch sort of took place for me, where I went sort of all in. Once I understood that, in essence, he was God on earth. In fact, he was greater than God. The gods came and prayed to him. And then he began this program of, it was leaked that people in Switzerland on these courses were flying. They were levitating, becoming invisible. They had supernormal powers of hearing, sight, taste, smell. They could navigate through the universe. They could heal their own bodies. And it was, it was so different because it was so scientific, presented in a scientific or couched in scientific ideas. And now all of a sudden there's this other thing. So,
but these were the stories you were hearing, weren't they? It was just hearsay.
No, they weren't just stories that we were hearing. These were university professors who had come back from these courses, and they were saying it out of their own lips. And then there was published literature saying that it happened, that the TM movement had. And so I don't know how many people came back from Switzerland, but in the hundreds, and they fanned out across the United States and gave talks on this. So I remember my first summer I came home from the university. I think it was the summer of '76. I think it was that summer. It could have been the next one, where I had done lots of postering. That's one of the actions we did as part of a phase of teacher training, was you had to put up so many posters. And there was a particular health food store that I could put the posters up in. They always accepted them. But I brought in this big poster, and it says, I think, you can become a Superman. And it said, Siddha, levitate at will, become invisible. And I remember the store owner saying, no one can levitate. That's crazy, and you can't put it up. And here I am, having not learned, only been told that they were there trying to convince this man that, yes, you can, because Maharishi said we could. And so people wanted demonstrations. They wanted to see it. And Maharishi's answer to that, or the movement's answer to that, was that would create a circus atmosphere. So we don't want a circus atmosphere. What we want to do is that you experience it yourself. And so if you experience it yourself, then you'll know it's real. And so that started the program called the TM City program. And that's all I wanted to do. So in the summer of 1978, I took the course at the university. It was a summer course. It was about 3 months. And it was a sort of a phenomenal experience for me. Just the anticipation of, we're going to be levitating. And to the point that I believed it. It's funny in retrospect, but I'm 62, so I was 18 maybe. There were these things that they created called portafoam. So when people levitated, as they called it at that time, levitation, the rooms, they had huge rooms filled with foam rubber. And the idea was, we were told, is that when your mind and body got coherent in the brain, the body would lift up. And when you lost coherence, it would fall down. And you didn't want to, fall on the cement floor. So the rooms were covered in foam rubber pads. So there was also something called a portafoam that somehow was triangular shaped, and you tied it on, and then you could fly in places where you didn't have foam. And so I bought one, anticipating that when I went home, I would be flying down I-75 to Florida. And then when I lost coherence, the foam rubber would hit. It's absolutely insane to think about it now. But when I heard professors, these are all PhDs, they're doctors, Nobel Prize winners, the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, actors saying, yes, they did it, that it was real, I believed them. And then I took the course myself. And it wasn't exactly what they said.
This was the so-called yogic hopping, where they're
Well,
in the lotus position.
It was not called yogic flying at the time, or yogic hopping. What it was called was levitation. The term yogic flying came in the 80s, and there's a story why I believe why that came about.
Okay.
But at that time, the literature said that the TM movement published, I have it, it said the body lifts up, moves 6 foot forward, and gently comes to the ground. That's what was in the literature. That's what the stories that were published in their promotional materials. So that's what we thought. The body would lift up, move forward.
It's very seductive, especially for a young man, to hear that. It's, everyone wants to fly, don't they?
Yeah, certainly, anybody that you'd ever had problems with in your life, you were going to outshine them because you were going to fly. And it wasn't just flying. The goal at that time was not just flying. The goal was to become enlightened like Maharishi, and these things would accelerate the process. But there was a huge emphasis on this levitation. So I took the course, and I think I sent you a picture of my badge. It was I think it was about 2 months or so, 6 weeks, we were increasing the amount of meditation significantly that more than we had in previous surrounding courses. And then it came time where we were going to learn these supernormal abilities. And it was so top secret. This was something that there was the fear that the CIA was infiltrating the movement, trying to gain this knowledge of how to do this. That prisoners, if they got out, could walk through the prison gates or walls. So it was so secret, and they just kept on emphasizing security. So there were all kinds of security checks at every level, interviews to take the course, other people interviewing you to take the course, making sure that you had any tarnishment in your background. So when we started learning, I remember it was at a building called the Learning Center. It no longer exists on the campus, but it was a building that had 2 sets of doors, like an outside set of doors on a vestibule, and then an inside set of doors. And so there was probably 350 people on the course. We were all divided up into groups of 6 people. Each group of 6 people had a group leader, and the 6 people each person had a buddy. So it was 2 buddies, 3 sets of 2 buddies, and one of those was the group leader. And that person sort of watched over us, and we were given forms to fill out every day to rate ourselves, how we were doing. And so we had options of how we would rate ourselves, and there was a color coding system. So you could be green, which meant everything's going good.
Mm-hmm.
You could be blue, everything's the same, or you could be red, there's a problem. It was called a pinch. You know, you're uncomfortable, things were going on. So you could be green, blue, or red, or you could be blue-red, like continuing problems. And so there was these combinations of colors. So you filled out a little thing every day, you passed it to the group leader passed it to a coordinator of 2 groups, the coordinator passed it on, and it finally got up to all the statistics to someone, and theoretically Maharishi knew that that's what was going on. And we, if you had been red or any problems, you would not be able to go on to the next level. So the day came when we went to learn these techniques. We learned them every few days or a week over about a month period, where we had badges with our pictures on them. And so we walked into this building, the front door, and there were 2 people standing, and they were my friends. And they had to check my badge that, like, they knew who I was. These are people that I know, but they needed to verify that I was who I was. And then we went through the vestibule, and there was a second set of doors, and 2 more people checked my badge. Again, these are people I knew, and they knew now that I was who I am, and I was allowed to be in there. Then the doors were locked from the inside. We sat in our rows of people, 1 person behind the next. And I might say that when we applied for the course, you had to provide lots of pictures of yourself, duplicates, many of them, 5, 6, 7. So the first thing that happened was some people came into this big room that I knew, and they asked everyone, he said, with the group leader, that's the first person in every row, check every person in your row's badge. And so the person that we knew checked those badges. And then they said, buddies, check your buddy's badge. So now these are people, first of all, that I knew that checked my badge coming in. Second group of people who I knew checked my badge again. Now I have the group leader who I've been with for 2 months, who I also knew, checking to make sure who I am. And now my buddy, who was the person assigned to me to do everything, he had to check my badge, and I had to check his badge. And then I had to check the person to the right of me, which is in a different group, and to the left of me. And so then they said, is everyone confident that the security is good? And so this is a setup for secrecy, privacy, not telling what's going on or what's going to happen. Then the door opened, and a couple came in that I had never seen before, and they had books, like, a book, and each page of the book had 6 pictures, and it was the pictures of everyone in a row, and they walked through the room checking each person's picture. And then another person came through, and again, with another set of books, checked everyone's picture.
What?
Then they were satisfied, and then this happened another 2 times. And once they were sure that we were who we said we were, some people came in and they put wires up and down the aisles and put a little earphone on each of our desks so that we could listen to the secret instructions of how to levitate. Because it was so private, people could be listening in. Well, in reality, this created a big antenna. And so but psychologically, it created an aura of specialness, of privacy, of exclusivity, that it's something that only in India, the gurus would teach to their closest disciples.
This reminds me of Scientology and the OT levels and
you got it.
being revealed about Xenu and all that stuff.
Yes, and similar to Scientology, we had to sign all kinds of agreements that we would not reveal this to anyone. This was total privacy. So it was so exclusive. So we at some point, before you learn any knowledge in TM, this type of knowledge, a ceremony is done. And the ceremony is everybody brings a flower. So we didn't bring flowers, but they gave us each a flower. We all went up in front of a table, which is an altar. And the teachers began doing the ceremony. So the ceremony, it's a table. I think I've sent you a picture of it with a picture of Maharishi's deceased teacher, some candle, incense, camphor, rice, sandalwood paste, water, and flowers, and fruit, and handkerchiefs. I forgot the handkerchiefs. And it sounds in English. I mean, it's what it sounds like. I'll chant a little bit. It is Apavitra Pavitrova Sarvavastan Gatopiva Yasmare Kundri Kacham Sabya Biantro Shushu. Now you don't know what this means unless you're a teacher. What that means in English is whether pure or impure, whether purity or impurity is permeating everywhere. Whoever opens himself to this expanded vision of unbounded awareness gains inner and outer purity. And then it goes on and basically leads to the point where you understand that the Maharishi is essentially God. There's a line, a phrase in it. And all of these offerings were offered to this picture. We all, not everybody, but we were encouraged to bow down, get on our knees and prostrate before the picture. And then we went back to our seats. And again, there were some security checks because somebody could have snuck in while this was happening. And then a videotape was put in, and there were TV sets around the room. And this procedure was at every step. But I'll only describe what happened when I learned the flying technique. So that was the last technique you learn. And so Maharishi said, the tape came on, he was sitting on his dais, completely covered in flowers. He was very serious. And he said, so you want to learn? I think the first thing he said was, you are seated on the foam rubber. And of course we were not. We were in classroom, sitting at a desk. And I'm like, oh, they got it wrong. But he said, you are seated on the foam, so you want to learn to fly. And he went on to a whole explanation about this flying. And then he instructed us what the secret of how you do it. And that was that every 15 seconds, you with your eyes closed, you think the phrase, relationship of body and akasha, lightness of cotton fiber. So you close your eyes, wait 15 seconds, relationship of body and akasha, lightness of cotton fiber. Wait 15 seconds, relationship of body and akasha, lightness of cotton fiber. Now there's a whole theory about why this works, but that was the formula. Then after we learned, they sent us back to our dorms, and my dorm had 25 men living in it, and in the basement of the dorm was now covered in foam rubber. And we went down and we were told to practice Transcendental Meditation 10 minutes and then do this thing, I think, for 5 or 10 minutes. And nothing happened. So what happened in our minds was like, oh my God, they told us we had to be in bed at 10 at night. And there was one night where I had to go to the bathroom and it was 10:01 when I went to bed. It was my fault. We weren't supposed to eat pizza and there was not enough food, so we ordered a pizza. This is my fault. You started reviewing anything that had gone on in your life that was, as they call it, OTP, off the path or off the program, things that you were not supposed to do. Oh, I had a beer a year ago. That's probably why I'm not. So we reassembled in this room, again with all these security checks, and a few people said they were levitating. And my dorm, the guys, we named it Daedalus Air Force Base. Kind of funny. There's a sign on the front. I mean, we were so excited that we were going to be flying. And so nothing happened. And so we added to this program that we did every day, this flying session. And I forgot how many minutes it was, but maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 or 3 times a day. I'm not exactly sure how many times. At this point, this is 45 years ago. And then one day, about 3 or 4 days into it, I was sitting on one side of a room, and my eyes are closed, sitting in like a lotus position. And the next thing I know, I hit the wall on the other side of the room. And I was screaming. And I just felt like bolts of lightning going through my body. And then it just became bedlam. The room, people started bouncing up and down, screaming, yelling, hyperventilating. And not everyone, but most of the people. And they called it the popcorn effect. That when one person, like a popcorn, I don't know why they think about it, that when you hear popcorn, first one thing pops and then the rest of them start popping. So the popcorn effect took place, and we were, it was kind of crazy. The people who nothing happened when they did it, were very angry at us who were screaming or hyperventilating because it was so loud, and they thought you needed to be quiet. And so we went back to the, at that day, and they would ask how many people had gotten off, started flying. And then they introduced the readings from some ancient scriptures, the Rig Veda, the ninth mandala of Rig Veda. So instead of now listening to Maharishi's lectures, we did all these practices in the morning, and then we would go into this group and we would read these scriptures. So someone would go to the front of the room and read it for 5 minutes, then the next person would read it for 5 minutes, and the next person would read it for 5 minutes. And so there was 2 scriptures. So it's like 45 years ago. I still know it by memory, having heard it so many times. It's 911, the Rishi is Mud Chundas of the family of Ashwamitra, the deity of the entire ninth mandala, except him 66 and 67, is Soma Pavamana, the meter is Gayatri. Flow Soma in a most sweet and exhilarating way, effused for Indra, the all beholding, the destroyer of the Rakshasas, or the demons, and on and on and on and on. So when that was reading, this imagery in its very suggestible state just took over. And people would be carrying pillows and just having to bury their head in pillows, screaming. Kind of looked like the cross between The Exorcist and the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I remember a friend of mine, there's a line in the Vedas that say, goat-born Kushan. And I remember this friend of mine from St. Petersburg, he was sitting there and all of a sudden he started screaming, goat-born Kushan! And people were rocking back and forth. So it became very in some way, like a supercharged, suggestive state of people modeling.
Let's be clear, you didn't see anyone flying though, did you?
Well, the thing is, your eyes are closed when you're flying, and the subjective experience is of flying. And so what you saw was the people hopping, but you think, oh, when he went up, there was a hesitation before he came down. So these are the kinds of things that are suggested. So I, have memories of seeing people sort of hesitating and coming down. Now, these are part of my memories, and I know they're memories of something that didn't happen. They're false memories. They're confabulated memories. But that's what was encouraged. And soon after that, I think it was 79, Maharishi created the first course. It was in Amherst, Massachusetts, where he introduced the idea that people should fly in large groups together every day instead of just doing it in our dorm. And when we did it, it would have, the effect of people levitating together would have the same effect as 1% of the population meditated. So it took 1% of the population of a city to meditate for the crime rate to go down. It took the square root of 1% of the population of people doing this levitation together for the crime rate to go down. So he encouraged people to move to Fairfield, Iowa, and the movement started getting strange. It was a lot more of spying, I don't know if that's the word, but reporting on people, anyone who was doing anything that was not within the lines, the rules of the organization. I got in trouble for burning the wrong brand of incense.
That's very typical in cults, isn't it? This idea of snitching, and you mentioned about a buddy that was always with you to keep an eye on you.
It is a thing, and eventually we'll talk about it. But I ended up suing the organization, and I subpoenaed all my records. And when I subpoenaed my records, the things that they had about me were bizarre to me. One of them person wrote at an interview, I'm 17, that I dress neatly, but my clothes were of poor quality. because you learn that most people shopped at Brooks Brothers or Neiman Marcus, had very fine clothes, and at that point I had not learned the rules of exactly. There was a note that it was suspected that I had a pair of blue jeans. And at that time, Maharishi had said that no one should wear blue jeans. They look like hippies. That we were judged as if we were judges, court judges. And everywhere we went, people would see us in that way. So we should always
the group look good, basically.
You had to look the part. So people mowed their yards with ties and white shirts on. The staff on the campus, the grounds crew, had ties on. Because you were never to do it. So it was suspected that I had, in the record, it said that it was suspected that I had a pair of blue jeans, which I did not. And when I got those records, I remembered the incident where I was brought in accused of having blue jeans. And I said, I don't have a pair of blue jeans. And the dean of students said to me, well, there must be some weakness somewhere in you. Because for that idea to come up in someone's thought, means that there's some weakness somewhere in you. So because somebody came up with an idea, it was my fault. Which is very much like some Scientology ideas. Whatever you do, it's your fault. Anything that happens to you, it's your fault. It's something you've done in the past.
Okay, it was the late 70s. You'd been in the group for a while, became a teacher, were giving lectures and rising in the ranks. And then Jonestown happened. This, of course, was the Christian cult whose members committed ritual suicide. Now, this really got you thinking, didn't it?
Yes, it did. In fact, I learned this levitation in the summer of 78, and Jonestown happened in, I think, November of 78. And it was shocking to me. There's something my sister had said to me. She said, my friends think that if the Maharishi flipped a switch, he would jump off a building. I'm going, oh, you're crazy. And so I was in the back of my mind, and I don't think I would have. I think that my intellect would have kicked in at some point, or I assume it would. But Jonestown happened, and it shook me. It was the first time I actually ever missed a meditation. And so I started trying to find out about Jonestown and started reading books. I was still at the university on cults and trying to understand what happened. And in the books at the time, they talked about ways in which people were made to be suggestible by sleep deprivation, poor diets, things like that. And that just was not the case at the university. In fact, we had to be in bed at 10. You needed to get 8 hours sleep. You had good food. But what I didn't realize is you can induce suggestibility by increasing the amount of meditation someone does. So you can do sleep deprivation, increases suggestibility, or meditation increases suggestibility. The goals were achieved in the same way. So I was always seeing how we weren't like that. I didn't see the similarities.